I'm Allie Vandenheuvel. I use she, they pronouns usually. And let's see, a word to describe myself. I feel like advocate is a good one. I mean, I don't want to give myself too much tooting my horn, but I really think that's a good one. I like to really help other people, and I'm going into public health, so that's how I want to streamline my experiences into helping other people.
For sure. What are some things that you wish people knew about you instead of just being a victim survivor?
I think that it's not an all-consuming thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that happens with a lot of other things, like, oh, you have this mental health issue or something like that, where it's like, you are, but it's just part of who I am, and it's becoming smaller over time. So I think just looking at a person holistically, like, I have interests, I do this with my life, I have friends, I have family. I think viewing a person holistically is a really big thing going into that. When I tell people that, I make sure that they know that.
Because it's definitely part of your identity, but it's not the whole thing.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the events that led up to your assault? It's okay if you don't feel comfortable sharing, or if there's things that you just want to stop, we can definitely do that.
Okay. So I was assaulted twice in high school, both at parties when we were doing things we shouldn't have been, first of all, drinking, things like that. And they were both people that I really trusted. I called them friends for a really long time, and then they chose that direction to use that friendship against me and think, oh, this is okay, we can do this. But stepping away was hard, but I had other people there that were helpful, so I'm glad I had them there. And apart from those two experiences, I was groomed by one of my parents' friends from like age 5 on, and just a lot of inappropriate things went on, sharing of inappropriate things, and yeah, just healing from that. That's mostly my background in sexual assault.
Yeah. With that, because I know this happened in high school, and I definitely, like, thinking back to, like, how high school is, did you have that support, or even, like, the people, because that's a really heavy topic to talk about, especially with, like, high schoolers. Did you feel like you could really rely on the people in your life to help you?
With the sexual assault outside of the grooming, it was peers, and I had to step away from that friend group because friends of his in both situations were like, oh, this is fine, it happens all the time, type of thing, the terrible things you hear usually. That was my experience, but I had friends who the same things had happened to from the same people, and in that, we found community of, like, it really was, like, hating this person, and, like, that was a super valid, like, response to it was just anger, and that was the easiest thing for us to just complain about the person all the time. So I had those friends at the time that were really, really supportive, and I'm really glad I had those people with me, even though I wish we and them specifically didn't have to go through it too.
Did you have an adult that you felt comfortable or trusted that you could talk to? Because that's a lot to, like, for you or even just the friends in your life to, like, really be grappling with.
I didn't really. I had the type of experience with my parents where it was, like, no talking about that. It's, like, taboo subjects.
Yeah.
Like, sex in general was, like, not talked about in my home. So I felt like it was a weird, like, oh, it'll tarnish my reputation with my parents, which makes no sense now, and I know that now, but just with adults, I felt that kind of divide, like, oh, they won't understand, but it was also living in a small town. I didn't have the type of, like, advocates around that I feel like I would if I were living around here or something like that.
That makes sense. But with the whole grooming, did you reach out to your parents, or do they?
They actually still don't know to this day. Working pretty close to being able to share that with people, and I find it easier to even share with people I don't know that well, because it just, that degree of separation is a lot easier to navigate than someone being that close. But they have moved away from this person, both, like, physical wise and, like, emotionally, friendship wise. So it's become easier. I still go home, but I don't see the person specifically, but it's working through in therapy has been really helpful, and that's the person that I always go to. But otherwise, I haven't shared that with any adults specifically in that sphere of my hometown.
That makes sense. Whenever you go back home, do you have any triggers? Especially just because you don't know if they are there at all, and just because your parents don't really know yet.
Yeah, I do for sure. I didn't at first, but I've been working with a new therapist who's really like turned my emotions and made me feel like how my body feels first, because I'm really good at suppressing my emotions. So I like, even as I'm driving in, I'll feel that I get a little more tense and a little more hypervigilant looking around and things like that. But my parents know, just like political wise, that I'm not a fan of the person, which has been a convenient thing to be like, oh no, we're not gonna see this person, things like that. But I do fear like going to grocery stores or things like that. I usually, if I'm going home, I'll go to like a coffee shop that I know I'll never go to. It's very much young people coffee shop, and then home, because I think that if I go anywhere else, I run that risk a little too much. So yeah, you're really working on those triggers, but coming to notice them in the first place has been a hurdle.
How has therapy really helped with that? Because it seems like a lot of this has come from like high school, but now you're in college, and obviously you're still dealing with the aftermath, and that will never like be healed. And I want to be clear with that, but like, how has therapy really helped you like deal with that trauma?
It has helped more than anything I've ever done ever. Like, to anyone in the whole world ever who has gone through anything, I recommend therapy, because there's a person out there who will help you so much. And I was originally going to Boynton, and I had a really good therapist there, but just wasn't getting like the level of care. They have a limit on how often you can go, and a lot of them have tons and tons of clients they need to see. So I switched to BetterHelp. It's an online version of therapy. So I go once a week now, which is super, super helpful. We can deal with like triggers as they come, and it's been a lot of like turning into how your body feels. Like if my throat feels tight while I'm talking about something, it's like because you haven't been able to speak your truth and people don't know. And yeah, this is kind of part of that, actually, like being able to just talk about it openly and having people that I know and trust be able to hear what I say and react in good ways is just what that first step before like moving on to telling people like in my closer ring of like family and friends.
Yeah. And that's really okay if you never want to share with your family. Like, that's really hard and difficult to do. But do you feel like the people in your life are really able to support you, or have been able to handle like knowing this and being able to be your support group?
I think sometimes it's been a process of, I think when I tell people, I really have had to break down that expectation of how they're going to react, because everyone has different experiences they're coming from in their background. So maybe people haven't even thought about that or heard about that or have actually experienced it themselves on the other side of the spectrum. So I had to break down of like expecting what they're going to say and let them sit with it, because it is a big thing to bring to the table in the first place. So I've really worked on it with my therapist to just let them deal with it and come back to it at a different time, especially with thinking about talking to my parents and things like that, is breaking down that expectation that they should be super supportive and everything like that, because it's a heavy thing to tell people. So I want to make sure that in my healing, I'm also giving the space to other people to even heal from hearing the situation.
What are some things that you wish people have done or said differently to you, or even just like, what does that support look like for you? Because a lot of people are like, I want to support you, and then they either just leave or they just don't continually like check up on you.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you like prefer, like would want from people if they say, I want to support you but I just don't know how?
Mm-hmm. I think Yeah, I've had a lot of experiences where people, first of all, don't even know what to say at the beginning because it is scary to hear that. And I think just being reassured that they will be there and they will check up, and that it's not like, it's kind of hard to describe, that like they just understand where I'm coming from, and they say like, oh, like you can always bring something to me, and you can tell me as much or as little as you want to, because I've had people be like, well, what does that mean, and wanting to go too much into it. But I think if you knew going in that a lot of people with trauma like to hint a little bit to gauge reactions, if you know that going in, I think it's a lot more helpful to know how to react when it comes in to the bigger perspective.
No, that makes sense, because like you don't want to in some way be a burden, but you do need to have that support or guidance in your life, because that's what friends are for.
Yeah.
What are some things that like have really helped you during your recovery?
Number one, like I said before, is therapy, for sure. I, even thinking back to like December of this year is when I first started with my new therapist, and to now, like looking back on journals and things like that is a crazy, crazy difference to how I've been feeling it. So really getting yourself into a position of that, knowing your therapist, knowing they know your past, and knowing how to move forward is really, really helpful, because I could never do that without her. And also I have an emotional support animal, and he has been amazing. It's hard to describe to people what level of functioning he provides me, because I'm sure like everyone has good relationships with animals and things like that, but just knowing that he's that stable part in my life, and that when I come home I always have someone happy to see me and things like that, and just, you know, getting me to be active and things like that has been super, super helpful. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I feel like I had something else, but I forgot it.
How have academics been? Because I know like that definitely like it's hard.
Yeah, I'm the type of person who likes to dive into what I'm doing, and I did it for a long time. Like my freshman and sophomore year, I was so busy. I was in way too many things and taking way too many credits to ignore that stuff in the back of my head, because it was easier to just be too busy to even think when you're falling asleep. So those have actually been relatively unimpacted for a long time. And now I think, now that I've taken a step back from being the insanely busy person, taking that time for myself has been way more helpful, and I wish I knew that a lot earlier. So making sure I have that balance between like therapy and journaling, making sure I make time for that has made it even better for my academics from when I was running on E all the time before. So self-care, which sounds like a cliche, but that's been the biggest thing on maintaining academics and being able to be involved and things like that.
Well, that makes sense. But then you just start to suppress yourself. But I think you've recognized, and especially with the pandemic, it's kind of like forced you to like really just be by yourself and like alone with your thoughts, which good or bad. So I'm happy to hear that you've been able to like really figure that out and do that. What are some things that you wish people knew or like understood differently about like sexual assault or even grooming? Because I don't think we talk about grooming at all, really, at like a societal level.
Yeah, it seems like it's something that really, in practice and even in like how people talk about it, just falls underneath the radar. It's because it just starts out, it's the building of it. It starts out with such innocent things and people write it off. But I think people should really, especially like parents coming out or friends, should really pay attention to those things. Because I had a few friends in high school who were like, that's kind of weird. Why were you with this person at overnight or something like that? And I would be like, it's normal. but it wasn't, and I didn't notice until they brought it up multiple times. So I think people need to realize that it's deconstructing what the person who's experiencing even thinks of it, and kind of being that reminder of, no, this isn't normal. No, let's take a step back from it. Is really, really important, especially for parents to notice too.
Well, it's hard because like as a kid you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because as an adult you kind of almost are like they should be trusted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of male like role models in my life growing up. Both my grandparents, my grandpas, excuse me, like passed away before I was even born, and my dad is the typical like not very emotional dude. He's a boomer, so he's not very in touch with his emotions. So I didn't have that person who I was really close with. So he kind of took that role of my dad and filled that in and used that to his advantage. So I think that's also something that people need to pay attention to moving forward.
No,
I feel like that's also seen outside of my experience. I think it's kind of a trend in sexual assault.
It's not your fault, and it's also like you're so young and very impressionable. So it's like it's not almost, it's like holding each other accountable like adults.
Yeah,
even
for sure.
like other like teachers or even like adults in like the school system. It's because like kids
don't know.
I know.
Yeah, I had no idea until like those friends, like I was saying in high school, were like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
And I still would write it off for a long time. But if a parent or like some other family member who was an adult would have said that, I would have thought about it a little more. So I think a lot of it goes down to like just like bare minimum, first of all, sex education and like relationships, consent. I think just the adults I grew up around didn't have that. Like my parents have no idea what a lot of that is. And being in the school system I definitely know that was lacking. So I think a lot of it can tie back to that.
Have you ever thought, because you mentioned that for so long you were angry, do you still feel like that? Or is it more so it comes and goes? And have you ever thought about like reporting, or is that something that you're like, I'm not going to do, or nothing's going to stem from it or come from it?
I am angry not all the time. I went through the period, my therapist always says that going through trauma is like going through the stages of grief, which is an interesting perspective on it, but I just recently got out of the anger stage of grief, so it weighs on you a little bit because you revert to when you were a kid and feeling powerless, because he's the classic pillar of the community, and feeling like, what am I supposed to do? How can I make sure that his reputation is ruined and things like that? And I think expressing that anger has been really, really helpful because I obviously don't have the outlet because I couldn't just go up to him and yell at him, even though I would love to. But I think being able to express that in therapy or with friends, just being able to channel that into something, even if it's like writing down in crazy, crazy handwriting that you're mad, doing something about it has been really, really helpful. And what was the second part of the question?
Have you ever thought about reporting?
I have, and that goes back to the anger stage where I would love if his reputation was ruined and people knew that he was a terrible person, but I know that 2 other girls went through the same thing with the same person at the same time. And there's been a lot of compounded trauma, and it's been really, really helpful to have those people to go to. And even though, again, I wish I didn't have that to fall back on, because I wish that I was alone in the trauma, which is a strange thing to say, but to actually have that community has been really, really helpful. But when thinking about reporting, I always fall back on, well, what do they want? How will this impact them? But I would say if I was alone in the experience, I would love, love, love to do that. And I've been trying to get my parents to move out of the town that they're in, just so I feel safer doing so, because it's very not gun safety there, so there's that kind of fear of people being a little crazy, and so I want my parents to move, and then that's hopefully something I'll be able to do in the future. But a lot of logistics to figure out first, unfortunately.
Seems like you're shouldering on so much of like how everyone else is gonna respond, rather than doing what's best for you. I mean, it seems like you are taking the steps of getting therapy, getting the help, but like it almost seems like you're more worried about how everyone else is gonna react.
Definitely.
Than what is best for you. And
yeah. My therapist would think that's astute, because she says that to me all the time. I think it's been hard to kind of separate those things because it was so like compounded together at the time that it happened, because of the relationships my parents have to him, and then how the other two girls are dealing with their trauma. So I do tend to put myself last. I feel sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm going through all these great steps, so I feel like I'm prepared, but I don't want to push them, or I want to make sure my parents are prepared to have that kind of story like dumped on them. But yeah, that's definitely something I'm working on, is being like, okay, let's think about yourself for a while, because I'm definitely the people pleaser type of person.
It's happened to you, and that should be the conversation. It shouldn't be like, how is everyone else gonna take it or react, or what is this gonna do to like the family, or even like his reputation. It's gonna get like, that shouldn't be like the focus. It should be more of like, how can we help Allie? How can we actually do? Yeah, it just seems like you're shouldering on so much, and it's not fair to ask. Nor should you, but like it's almost like in society, it's like all of like you have to advocate for yourself, because like the system is not gonna do it for you. People just don't know how to like really advocate for others.
Yeah, I think if I had that type of like, I know my parents are gonna be like, yeah, I'll support you however I can, or like understanding how trauma affects me. A lot of it just goes back to like underlying education. If they knew what to do and how to appropriately respond and even deal with their own emotions going out of it, I think I would feel safer in doing so. But yeah, you're definitely right. My experience is a lot of making sure other people are okay before being able to tell people, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I'm sorry that you have to deal with that, because that's not okay at all. But it's almost like you have to have like someone else talk to your parents and like help them get the resources so they know how to actually have this conversation, have the background.
Yeah, that's been my next step with my therapist, is maybe working to get, my dad the boomer-esque wouldn't like it, but to get my mom to maybe go to therapy and start being, so I know she's prepared in that type of sense. And then even though that's extra steps outside of it, knowing that I'll have that for her to fall back on and for me to fall back on, that preparedness, I guess, emotional preparedness will make me feel better in the end, even though it's a lot of steps in between. I think like victim blaming goes into that too, and even like knowing what's okay to like talk to a kid about and things like that, or knowing how to respond and how just believing the person, which I think a lot of that worry also comes from societal impact of, oh, is my dad actually going to believe me if I say it? Is he going to ask for details or proof, you know? So I think that's also ties back into education of just believing a person when they tell you something instead of having to pick apart what they're telling you.
Sure. No, it's just, I think everyone just hopes hopes that their parents believes them, but it's also like, you know your parents and you know their tendencies, and it's just like, you go through all these steps, and that shouldn't be the case at all.
Yeah, for sure. Education. We just need it. They need it a lot too.
What is something that you would tell someone who's going through something similar as you, whether that was through the assault or like grooming?
I think, of course, there's the first things when you first hear it, like, I'm here for you, you can tell me whatever little or lot you need to tell me. And I think a lot of, in my experience, what I wish I had is people checking up afterwards, like you were talking about earlier. I feel like in the friends that I've found, they know what to say originally, like, that shouldn't have happened. And I had one friend who, her response was similar to what I was just saying, but then she was like, I'm not going to tell you that that shouldn't have happened to you because you know that. And I was like, okay, all right. But it's just those, even saying the simple, like, cliches of it.
I believe you, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's has way more impact than the person saying it probably thinks. So just that underlying, like, I believe you, I'm here for you, the reassurance, and then sustained reassurance is really, really the biggest part. Like, not treating it like a taboo subject, like, okay, you told me this once, but I'm never going to talk to you about it again. And pushing that aside, even though it might be scary for the person, like, if I were to hear that, bringing it up is normal, and it's part of my experience. And if I told you, yeah, it's okay for us to talk about it, and I don't want it to become something that you're like, am I allowed to bring this up? Because if I told you I trust you, and I think they need to have that trust back, that I'll be okay if they check up on me, and I would love it if they did.
Do you feel like after telling people have been walking on eggshells of like, oh, I can't say this, or this might be like that, or have you felt that people have treated you completely different, or treated you as if you were like fragile, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think, the eggshells is really my experience. Like, if I say this, what is she gonna think? Or if, like, the same type of thing, if I ever bring it up, or if somebody else says something kind of similar nearby, people will be like, what is Allie gonna think?
Yeah.
So I think just treating people like normal people, like, I'm not being worried that I'm going to fall apart because they know that I'm in therapy and I'm working on things. So I think just trusting me to be able to handle those things, because I've worked really hard to be able to. But of course, under that is also the checking up on people, not just assuming that I'm fine, but in public settings, I don't think you have to snap your head to double check that I'm alive over there. So that's a different story, but.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share with us or want us to know?
I think just pay attention to your friends, check up on your friends, like, you never really know what's going on in things. I think just being really aware of what's going on with even yourself, because I didn't know for a really, really long time, but being able to look back and reflect is also really important. And therapy, 100% therapy. Everyone go to therapy all the time. I could not be a better proponent of it. And get an animal, because that's 100% helpful.
To close off, what are some things or words that you would use to describe yourself?
I would say strong, advocate, like before, resilient, determined, and happy.